Good evening and welcome back to our weekly question and answer series for nash.org. Question: a house that does not have 4x4 amos, is it mechiv במזוזה, and do you make a brakha if you put a mezuzah? Let me just explain the question. A house, in order should be mechiv b'mezuzah, has to be a shem, a name of a house. A house which should be livable. And Chazal say it has to be minimum 4 feet, 4 amas by 4 amas, which is 6.43 feet by 6.43 feet. Any room which has this size is mechiv b'mezuzah b'brocha. So the question is, if you have a house which is only 2 amas in the width, but it is, let's say, 10 amas in the length, so it has the square foot it has. That means 6.43 by 6.43 comes out roughly 41 feet, square feet. Now a house, a room which has more than 41 square feet, but it is not square. It's not 4x4, it is 2x10, 2x8. Is it mechiv b'mezuzah or not? And the answer is, the Mechaber Shechanorach writes in Yeridai Simar Reish Paivuf Sifid Gimel, which is Hilchas Mezuzah. The Mechaber writes that if you could make it square and it will have 4x4, then it's mechiv b'mezuzah. That means if it's 2x8, it's mechiv b'mezuzah, because if you make it square, it will be 4x4. And this is Shittas Rambam. And Mapashta, the Mechaber writes, is mechiv b'mezuzah. It means you could put on a mezuzah mit a bracha. But the Shach over there, Sif Kutnechov Gimel, writes that the Rosh holds that it's not mechiv b'mezuzah, and it has to be 4x4. And the Shach adds on that also the Ban Yerichem holds like the Rosh. So therefore we have a couple of Rishonim which hold that it has to be 4x4. So if it's not 4x4, it's 2x8, you don't put a mezuzah. So the Shach finishes, so you should put a mezuzah without a bracha. Don't make a bracha. And this is how the Derech Chaim paskens in Simar Reish Lamed Zayin Sif Tes, that if you could make it square, then you should put a mezuzah, but you shouldn't make a bracha. And this is how a lot of poskim pasken what you should do. But the Alter Rebbe in Shechanorach, in Hilchas Eirven, Simmer Shin Samach Vuf Sif Hai, he writes regarding Hilchas Eirven. The lacha is that you have to put the Erev, a Riva Chetzaris, you have to put in a house, in a dire, in a bais which is ru'el dire, which is livable. So the Alter Rebbe writes that you cannot put the Erev in a house which does not have 4x4, because if it doesn't have 4x4, it's not a dire which is considered livable. And he adds on, even if it's long, that means it is 10 feet, 15 feet, whatever it should be, but since it's not square dalet al dalet, it's not considered a dira, as we see in Yeridai Simik Reish Paivuf. And therefore you cannot put the Erev in such a room. This is what the Alter Rebbe writes in Hilchas Erev. And in the Marmakoimas, which the Alter Rebbe wrote, not which was added on in the new Shechanorach lately. So the Alter Rebbe writes, Si Shach Simar Reish Paivuf, that we pass in the Iker is like the Rosh, and see also Tirzu of Simatuf Reish Lamadalat, that even the Rambam holds like that. Not like the Bes Yosef and the Ralbach, which the Mugan Avrum brings down, which understood that the Rambam disagrees with the Rosh. So we see over here that the Alter Rebbe holds that the halacha is like the Rosh, that if it's not square dalet adalet, you don't need to have a mezuzah, and you cannot put an Erev over there. Not only that, because the halach is like the Rosh, he holds that even the Rambam doesn't hold like this. The Mechaber, the Bes Yosef thought, or he learned in the Rambam like that, but the Alter Rebbe disagrees, so to speak, with the Mechaber, and therefore he holds that the Iker is like the Rosh, and it's not considered a bias, even though if you could square it out, it should be 4 by 4. And this is also how the Alter Rebbe writes in Hilchas Eirev and other place, Siman Shin Tzadik Ches, Sif Yid, a house which is not Dalat Adalat, although it's long and you can make it Dalat Adalat, it's not considered a house. Now, most Rishonim and Poskim did not understand like the Alter Rebbe learned in the Rambam, and they hold that there is clearly a machlokes between the Rambam and the Rosh. That the Rosh holds it's not considered a house, and it's potem b'mezuzah, and the Rambam holds there is mechiv b'mezuzah. And this is how the Bes Yosef, we see the Bes Yosef holds like that, and even the Rosh when they disagree with the Rambam, you see that they hold and they learned that the Rambam holds that you are mechiv b'mezuzah. And this is how the Bach in the Bir Agru, in Chasam Sofer in the Chivas, in Maramashik, the Marsham in the Mishnah Brira, all of them hold that there's a machlokes between the Rambam in the Rosh. According to the Rambam, you are mechiv b'mezuzah, and Pashtas even bברכה. According to the Rosh, you're not mechiv b'mezuzah. And the Shach paskins that you should go in between, put a mezuzah without a bracha. So, according to the Shach and most poskim, you should put a mezuzah without a bracha. According to the Alter Rebbe, the Pashtas, you don't even need to put a mezuzah even without a bracha. But there is a way to say that the Alter Rebbe is also masking to the Shach that although the Iker is how we paskin like the Rosh, it's potem b'mezuzah, but it is kedai to be a machmer like the Rambam and to put on a mezuzah without a bracha. And we could say that in Eirev the Alter Rebbe paskins lekila because he wants, it's only a drabonon. So, but drabonon you go always after the Michael. So therefore he says that a house which is less than 4 by 4, it's not considered a house, and therefore it doesn't ask around the other person which lives in the next house. But not necessarily when it comes to a daraisa, we will also say that the Alter Rebbe holds that it's not a bias. But that's not poshet, because we see the Alter Rebbe writes in Choshe Mishpat, Hilchas Shmiras Hagif, Sif Aleph, regarding the halacha of Makkah, to put a fence on top of the roof of a house, which there's a mitzvah's essa to make a fence around the roof of a house, but it has to be a house which in the bottom, in the need, it's a livable house. So the Alter Rebbe writes, a house which doesn't have dalat al dalat is not considered a house, and it's potem in Makkah. So we see, even by mitzvahs essa, doeraisa, not only by the Drabunan, the Alter Rebbe holds that if it doesn't have dalat al dalat, it's not considered a bias. So, according to the Alter Rebbe b'pashtas, a house which is not dalat al dalat, even you can make it dalat al dalat, you don't need to put a mezuzah even without a bracha. But after all, since we can make a chilik between mezuzah and makkah, which I don't want to go into it now, so we should do like a skumas apoiskim, that you should put a mezuzah but without a bracha. And that's the minig oilam. A room which is, let's say, 2 amas by 10 amas, and you could square it out, it should be dalat al dalat, 4 by 4, you put a mezuzah but you don't make a bracha. Question: if a person releases an unpleasant smell from their body, like by passing gas, but they do not smell it, because they are wearing a mask, or they have COVID, or the like, are they allowed to daven, make a bracha, etc.? Now the Alter Rebbe writes in Orachayim, Siman Ayin Tes, Sif Aleph and Bais, he writes like this: if a person is in a place which there is human waste, tzoyes udam, even if it doesn't have a smell, he has to go away from that place, dalat amas, because the pasuk says v'hoya machnecha kodesh, that your machna, your site, your place where you are should be kodesh, and the place for a person is dalat al dalat amas. So therefore, if there is human waste in your dalat amas, even if you don't smell anything, you cannot make a bracha or daven. And if it does have a smell, that it's not enough that you go away from the waste dalat amas, you have to go away from where the smell finishes, from where you're not smelling anymore. From there you have to go away dalat amas. And the Alter Rebbe adds on, and even if you have a sickness which you don't smell, your nose is not working, you still have to stay away dalat amas from the place where the smell finishes. That's when it is in that place human waste. Then in Sivav he writes, if you had human waste in a house, but you took it out already, and it stayed only the smell, that means you have over here a smell without physical waste. The Alter Rebbe, you should be machmar, you shouldn't say krishma or daven or say a bracha till where you're not going to smell that smell anymore. Even though you don't have the waste, the actual waste is not in your present, but since you still smell it, you shouldn't say a bracha. But he adds on, a person which doesn't smell it could daven and say Kriya Shema, since there isn't the actual human waste. So to go back to your question, if a person releases an unpleasant smell which you don't have the actual human waste, it is only a smell. If he doesn't smell, he could say a bracha or he could daven. But if someone is right next to a bathroom and there is a smell in a place which there is human waste, it's not enough that he doesn't smell, he has to stay away dalat amas from a place which a person which does smell will now feel it. Question. I know that preparing the salads and settings, the Shabbos and Yom Tov table includes many malachos, such as toichen and boirer, that could only be done close to the Suda. If I would like to go in shul on Shabbos or daven Ma'ariv on Friday night, am I allowed to prepare everything before davening so that it's really when the men come home from shul, everything will be ready? Or do I have to do it immediately before the meal, which would mean that the family has to wait until it's ready? And then the question is also, is there any difference between Yom Tov and Shabbos? And the answer is, regarding Shabbos, you cannot do it before you go to shul. You have to wait till after the men come home from shul, and only then prepare the food, because Shabbos there is a isser of boirer, and it has to be sumach l'sa'udah, has to be right before the Suda. So therefore you cannot do it before you go in shul in the morning or at night. So when you come home from shul, it should be ready. It has to be done only when you come home from shul. Now if the men will have to wait, they'll have to wait, but you cannot prepare it beforehand. That's Shabbos. Regarding Yom Tov, the Alter Rebbe writes clearly in Hilchas Yom Tov, Siman Tuf Kiv Yid, Siv Gimel, that although Shabbos is boirer, if you bake boirer in Shabbos to put away for a longer time, not to eat it right away, it is Chiyuv Chatas, that means Osem in HaTorah. Yom Tov, you're allowed to make boirer letzorech Yom Tov, letzorech achila. So therefore, you could also take out psoilis mitach oichel if that's easier. You could take out even if you want to put it away for a couple of hours. Yom Tov, L'tzoirech Achila, is mutter boirer. So to answer your question, Shabbos, you cannot do it before you're going to shul. You have to do it only after the men come home from shul, or when you come home from shul. And Yom Tov, you could prepare it before you go to shul. It should be ready when you come home from shul. Questions. Chalas, which when they bake it, it gets connected to each other. But the bakery has in mind to pull it apart and sell it individual. If you buy 2-3 pieces when it's connected, can you use it for Lechem Mishnah, or is it considered, or is it considered one? That means, do you need to divide it in order to have Lechem Mishnah, or you could have it connected together and you don't need to divide it, since it's made to be divided. Even if you didn't divide it, it's good for Lechem Mishnah. And the answer is, it's a machloikas of the Shoyle Maishav, Chaylik Aleph, Sof Simon Kif Samach Zai writes that since the bakery had in mind to divide it, you don't need to divide it, and even when it's connected, you could still make Lechem Mishnah. But the Marsham, Chivas Marsham, which is brought down in Orches Chaim Simon, Reish Ayin Dalat Tzidkun Aleph, writes that you should disconnect it before you make Lechem Mishnah. So the Shoyle Maishav says you don't need to disconnect it, and the Marsham holds that you need to disconnect it, and this is the minig oilem that you disconnect it. But again, if you didn't do it, it's okay because you have a Shoyle Maishav. Question. If I wash for a meal and before I bench I have dessert, do I have to make a new bracha on the dessert? Yes, the Alter Rebbe writes in Simon Kif Ein Zayin Sif Bais Chaim that anything which you eat which does not come machmas asida, which means it's not the regularly thing that you make asida on it, it does not come to fill you up or to lafas apas, which means all kind of fruits, cooked or raw, mezoinos, ice cream, all these things is called things which do not come for a Suda, and you have to make a bracha beforehand. Even if you eat it in the end of the Suda in order to make you, l'kenicha Suda, you still have to make a bracha. You don't have to make a boire nefushois or alamichiu because it gets pattered from berch samuzen, but the brucha beforehand you have to make when you eat dessert in the end of the Suda. Question. A certain tzedukah organization has an annual raffle. If I save all the tzedukah I put in their pushka throughout the year until the raffle, I have a better chance to win a prize. Meanwhile, several times a year the organization sends emails asking for donations. When I receive the email, am I obligated to give? Or should I empty out the pushka and send it in? Or can I empty it out the pushka only when it comes the annual raffle and buy it and then send it in? Also, do I need to give every time when they send an email, or once a year is enough? And the answer to this question is, it depends what your kavanah was when you're putting in money in the tzedukah pishka. If you put in the pushka, you're putting in money for tzedukah without anything in mind, and then you decide that this organization is making a raffle and you want to take the money from the pushka and send it in buying raffles, it's not acceptable. You cannot do that because it's already tzedukah. So therefore, you gave it already for tzedukah. You cannot purchase a raffle with this money. But if you're putting it into that pushka with a mind that over here you're saving the money for this organization, that when they are going to have an annual raffle, you are going to take the money from this pushka and you are going to send it in and buying from that pushka a raffle, then you could do it because that was your kavanah. it goes in the machlokes as we mentioned previous of the shach and the nasivas, but it is, you could do it if you had in mind, then you could do it. And if the question, if you have to give every time when they send you an email, no, you don't have to give. You could send it in only once a year. Avad is doa inyan to give tzedakah constantly, like the Alter Rebbe writes, a couple of times than one big sum. But over here, you're giving it on a daily basis, smaller amounts. It is only when you should send it into the organization, you can send it in once a year, it's not a problem. But you have to remember, anyone who buys from Moas Maser a raffle, which according to a lot of poskim, if you had in mind to begin with, when you started to give Moas Maser money, that you are giving not only for only you could also give it for other things, other tzedukahs. So then you could buy a raffle for a moized. You have to remember that if you win that raffle, you have to give the money which you purchased that raffle, you have to give back to Maser, because you cannot pay from Maser and take the winning amount to yourself. So that amount which you gave and you purchased the raffle, that $20, whatever it was, you have to give from your pocket back to your Maser. Question: I'm working now full time and have a limited amount of time. I have time either to daven, shachras, or to say chitas. What must I do? Now, we mentioned already previous shirim that the Alter Rebbe and the Mishnah Berurah and other poskim pasken that women are mechiyev to daven twice a day, shachras and mincha. They have to daven shmoina esra, and that's a chiyuv. So when you have a question, what do you need to do? You have to daven. You should daven shachras or mincha or say chitas. Of course, first you have to do what's your mechiyev to do al pi din. Then you do, which is minik chasidim, or even such a holy and important thing as learning chitas, which the Rebbe emphasized that much. But when it comes, you have the option only or learning chitas or davening shachas and mincha. The Shulchan Aruch comes before, as the Rebbe writes that all minhag Chabad is only things which is after Shulchan Aruch. So since Shulchan Aruch says that you have to daven shachas and mincha, shmoin esra, if you only have time for one, you have to do first shmoin esra, and then you say chitas. But I doubted that the 3-4 minutes of saying shmoin esra will steal all the time which you had for chitas. So if a person really wants, could do davening and saying chitas. But if it happens to be that it's impossible, you only have a couple of minutes and you cannot say chitas if you are going to daven, davening is first, because that's lahalocha, that's a chiyuv, and that comes before learning chitas. Okay, thank you for joining us, and please join us again next week and send in your questions to inbox@anash.org. I see a lot of people lately sending their questions to my personal email, but I prefer if you could send it in through inbox@anash.org. Good night and have a wonderful week, and v'yankev hulech l'darkei.